Okay, we are back with Thomas Taylor on his dissertation on Aristotle's philosophy, on the philosophy of Aristotle. It's been a little while. We're going to try to get back into doing these consistently. We still have a lot of this book to get through, and it's been very dense, a lot of really good material. We just covered the footnote um, on some different aspects of the soul, why it's actually a good thing that some souls are forgetful, um, because that allows a rank of beings to exist that will have a kind of free will and autonomy that otherwise wouldn't exist. And we are just going to keep going in the text. Uh, and as far as which text we're drawing from, I believe we are back to Thomas Taylor's introduction to his translation of Aristotle's De Anima. But we'll keep going. Hence, after the subterranean places of judgment, the soul becomes again a resident on the earth, till, being purified by herself and liberated from generation, she becomes adapted to ascend. Then, therefore, when she ascends, she lays aside anger and desire together with this pneumatic vehicle. After this pneumatic vehicle, however, there is another body perpetually suspended from the soul, which is celestial, and on this account perpetual, and is luciform or starry. So the pneumatic level of the spiritual body is just one among several. There is the etheric body, the light body. So here he's talking about the dynamics of reincarnation, where certain things are stored in the pneumatic vehicle, the irrational faculty of the soul, those erectic and desiderative faculties um, are they belong to the declined irrational aspect of the soul. The perfect irrational element, the principle of the irrational soul, is there in immortal souls as well. Mortal souls have a declined irrational faculty. That's what distinguishes us. And some aspects of that um, aside, she lays aside anger and desire together with this pneumatic vehicle. So, one level of the okema, the pneumatic aspect of it, is not absolutely immortal. It some aspects are taken on with corrupted mortal life, and some are stripped off again with rebirths. But another, after this pneumatic vehicle, the light body, the celestial or starry uh, body, is going to, I assume, be the immortal level of the okema, and the one that is inseparable from the soul, or at least it never, in actuality, is separated from it. For the soul ranking among mundane natures, it is perfectly necessary, since she is a part of the world, that she should have a certain allotment to maintain. And if she is always self movable, and it is necessary that she should always energize, it is necessary that she should perpetually have a certain dependent body, which she may always vivify. So a thing's nature is, manifested or fulfilled in its activities, and soul specifically is a thing that animates body, moves body. It's the form of the body, as Aristotle defines it, or the entelechy of the body. So it's part of the nature of soul to have a body which is animated by it. And so for that reason, there are other arguments we've seen in Neoplatonic texts for why there should always be an aspect of the okema that is inseparable from the soul. Here, the argument is that for the soul to always energize according to its proper nature, it always has to have a body that is animated by it. Okay. Hence, she always has a luciform body. The light body is, I guess, the peak of these bodies, which is also perpetual. From what has been said, therefore, it is necessary that there should be a pneumatic body, and that from this, anger and desire should be inseparable. So, the lower faculties are only associated with the pneumatic body and lower, the light body. Um, right, he's not exactly saying that so far, but we can say that the pneumatic body associated with human life, the lower one that we take on in our descent through the stars, as is described elsewhere, that pneumatic body that I think in Plato himself, actually, that's described. So the pneumatic body that is filled up with accretions of mortal nature, uh, from that, anger and desire is part and parcel, but not so with the light body, probably. It is evident also that as the vital and erectic powers of the irrational soul are in the pneumatic vehicle, so likewise the Gnostic powers of this soul. Okay, so the motive and desiderative aspects of the soul are there in the pneumatic vehicle. So also should the Gnostic abilities of the soul be present in the pneumatic vehicle in some form. For if the subordinate powers may be separated from this gross body, much more may the superior powers, and the Gnostic powers, viz., fantasy and sense, are superior. Uh, yeah, knowledge is superior to desire, appetite, and so if even the vital and erectic powers, it's an a fortiori argument. So the superior aspect of the soul, even more, should be able to separate from the gross body. And so what's present in the gross body, the higher faculties should be present in the higher aspects. The pneumatic vehicle is superior to the gross vehicle, or the corporeal body. Though, however, the irrational powers of the soul have their being in this pneumatic vehicle, yet certain vestiges proceed from it to this gross body. So the irrational powers principally subsist in the pneuma, our pneuma, and yet certain vestiges of those irrational powers do proceed to the gross body. Arrow of causation is downward, the body being affected, not affecting the soul, just as common conceptions proceed from intellect to all souls. So, similarly, a higher aspect imprinting itself on the lower, so the aspects of the pneuma imprint themselves in the gross body. For that the illuminations of the irrational life pervade as far as to this outward body is evident. For anger, as we have before observed, moves the blood about the heart and causes it to become fervid, and desire disposes the liver in conformity to its own motions. I think we've actually read this section already. We'll just keep going. Okay, so uh, yeah, there are manifestations clearly in our corporeal nature of pneumatic activities like desire and anger. All the senses likewise illuminate the brain, for the sensitive power is imparted from the brain to the sensoria through the nerves. And when the brain is injured, the senses become unenergetic, as physicians demonstrate. Remember, this is 19th century text, not an ancient text. Currently, for the sensitive power is imparted from the brain to the sensoria through the nerves, and when the brain is injured, the senses become unenergetic, as physicians demonstrate. And when the part pertaining to the back is injured, the superior part indeed of him who is hurt is still sensitive, but the inferior parts become destitute of sensation. So frontal lobe activity doesn't cease, but inferior senses will if the rear of the brain is injured because the sensitive power is no longer supplied from the brain in consequence of the organ, i.e., the nerve, being injured. If also a nerve is tied, again, the lower part is deprived of sense, but the upper part remains sensitive. Okay, so the powers, the higher powers of the soul are harder to remove. The lower sensitive powers, less so. Following Proclus's rule, where higher powers exert their energies first and as a substrate to lower powers. So the higher aspects flow down to the body. Higher aspects of sense and our Gnostic faculty are actually there first, although we may come to know those elements later in time pedagogically. From the evidence, however, of all things themselves, it is still more manifest that there is a pneumatic body, and that from this anger and desire are inseparable, for whence are shadowy phantasms seen in sepulchres. Um, so ghosts. Ghosts are clearly desirous and angry from our experience with ghosts, as we know. So clearly, these faculties are inseparable from the pneumatic body. For the soul is not figured, nor is, in short, visible. But unpurified souls, after their departure from this body, wander for a certain time with the pneumatic vehicle, and this becomes apparent about sepulchres. Hence, every attention must be paid to rectitude of conduct in life. For the pneumatic vehicle and its spirit becoming thickened from a depraved mode of life, the soul is attracted about the passions. So, if we have a habit of giving into desire in the body, well, that desire stems from the pneuma, and the pneuma is separable from the gross body, and so those desirous or avertive or angry aspects of the pneuma will energize unfettered, perhaps even more vigorously than they did in the gross body. For this spirit possesses something of the vegetative life, since it is nourished. Okay, so that's interesting. The pneuma requires nourishment. And that's why it participates of desire, I suppose, because it's lacking something. It requires nutriment. It is not, however, nourished like this gross body, but through vapors, not by parts, but wholly through the whole of itself, in the same manner as sponges receive vapors. Well, now you know. On this account, more worthy men pay attention to a thinner and drier diet, in order that the spirit may not be thickened, but attenuated. Okay, another reason to avoid beans. Okay, so stay away from gross foods so as not to thicken your pneuma. Hence, one of the Chaldean oracles admonishes that we should not defile the spirit, nor give depth to a surface. Okay, so by the spirit signifying the pneumatic vehicle of the soul, and by the superficies, its ethereal and lucid vehicle. Okay, so the mere surface of it, or the upper limit of it, is the etheric and light body. So let's leave it at that and not add to the okema by fattening up the pneuma and giving it too much depth. For this purpose, also, purifications are to be employed. For this outward body is cleansed by water. The pneumatic vehicle is the pneumatic vehicle by purifications through vapors, since through some vapors it is nourished and is purified through others. It is not, however, distributed through various instruments, but wholly energizes through the whole of itself according to the senses and apprehends sensible objects. So the pneuma doesn't have organs, it acts unifically. How, therefore, does it appear in sepulchres endued with members and organs, and sometimes in a human shape, but at other times having the form of some other animal? To this we reply, in the first place, that it frequently appears to have a human shape in consequence of being thickened by an improper mode of living, and receiving the impression of the surrounding body, just as ice receives the impression of the vessels in which it is congealed. So accretions, we're viewing accretions of the pneumatic vehicle. How, therefore, is it seen to have different forms? Perhaps, when the soul wishes it to become manifest, by moving the fantasy, it at the same time impresses the pneumatic vehicle. Okay, so he's theorizing here. Or perhaps, through the cooperation of some power superior to the soul, it appears, and again becomes unapparent in consequence of becoming rarefied and condensed. Okay, so the higher providential powers or forces or intelligences might use a given soul attached to a pneuma, a ghost. It might use a given spirit to manifest in the shape of something else because the pneuma has that capacity. And naturally, the way it might manifest as a human form is that, the pneumatic vehicle has formed itself in the image of its gross body that it was unduly attached to. So there are two different ways that a pneuma or spirit or ghost might appear in different forms, one by higher forces, one by its own natural tendency to conform itself to the objects of its desire. For being aerial, it is rendered visible by condensation and invisible by dispersion and rarefaction. So one capacity it has is condensation and rarefaction. Densing the pneuma leads to its visibility. And thus much concerning the pneumatic vehicle of the soul. Let us now return to what more immediately concerns Aristotle's treatise on the soul. In this treatise, then, it is concluded by Aristotle that the essence of the soul may be known from natural philosophy, so far as it is the form of animals, viz., so far as it is a form by which animals are defined as animated beings. So, the aspects of the soul that pertain to animal nature and lower animals, especially, that is a subject of natural philosophy. Perhaps the higher elements of the human soul go beyond natural philosophy, of which also Aristotle is dubious whether it ought to be denominated soul, or a part of soul, or that which is not without soul, so far as it has the power of increase and sensible perception, and is the cause of local motion. Right. Okay, so this aspect of soul that deals with animate bodies maybe isn't even soul, properly speaking. Maybe that's just an aspect of soul. Or maybe it's not a part of the soul, but is the thing that is never without soul. Like the living body is inseparable from soul, and it has the power of increase in sensible perception and is the cause of local motion. The direct cause of the motion of the living body will be that which is never without soul, but maybe it's not soul itself that directly animates the body. For so far as the soul is intellective, it is to be known by the first philosophy, or metaphysics. That's not natural science, right? Which has a knowledge of intelligibles themselves and of the intellect to which they are objects of contemplation. So metaphysics also encompasses intellect itself. It makes sense, metaphysics would be about the intelligibles, about the forms, but it's also about the faculty which knows them. And which not only knows the intellect exempt from soul, but that likewise, which is the summit of our essence. So the intellect, qua summit of soul, is also a subject of metaphysics, not just intellects that are purely in the second hypostasis. For by our intellect, those intelligibles are surveyed. Okay, so because we know the intelligibles in the second hypostasis, our intellect also is a proper subject of metaphysics because there's a relation um, there. So there's some property that the two things have in common. By our intellect, those intelligibles are surveyed. And the intellective and intelligible, being relatives, are contemplated by one and the same science. Okay. Intellective and intelligible are relatives. Right. And so therefore they're contemplated by the same science in the same manner as the sensitive power and the sensible object. Right. So subject and object here, two sides of the same coin. We can't have a science of one without the other. Hence, the theory of the soul is neither simply physical nor metaphysical, but adheres to both. Aristotle, however, seems, by considering both physiology and metaphysics as philosophy, to elevate the former and produce the latter as far as to soul. For some metaphysics, the lower bound of metaphysics is the upper bound of the soul. For it is evident that the soul is not an essential boundary in the same manner. Yep. Uh, in the same manner as natural forms are the boundaries of bodies, since the latter are boundaries as of bodies, but the soul is a boundary as of the form of animals. Soul is not an essential boundary in the same manner as natural forms are the boundaries of bodies, since the latter are boundaries as of bodies, but the soul is a boundary as a form of animals. Okay, so let me try to understand that before we move on. I think he means that the form of natural bodies is inherently a limit of those bodies because it's the terminus of their volume. You know, the form, the shape, in the immanent morphe shape of the thing, natural form, is inherently a boundary, but the soul is not inherently a boundary. It is that in some sense. It's a boundary as the form of animals, giving it its morphe and shape, but it's also more, and the latter indeed are the principles of being moved. So the principles of being moved is the immanent shape. The immanent shape, morphe, of physical bodies is the principle of their motive nature insofar as they are altermotive. The principle of altermotive natures is their morphe, because the morphe is superior to their hyle. So their hylomorphic compound situates morphe as the principle. So as a moved object, an altermotive object, the superior aspect of it is the morphe form. Um, so there you go. The latter indeed are the principles of being moved. The shape of bodies is the principle of their being moved, but soul is a principle of moving, or is the motive principle. For I feel like that's something we should remember too, that morphe, the immanent morphe of inanimate bodies, is the principle of their being ultramotive natures. So something about shape will be tied up to the act of being moved. Shape is prior to motion, I would think, because non-physical bodies like the mathematicals that are geometric, those also have shape and morphe. But that's not natural morphe anyway. But okay, something to think about. It reminds me of the triangles in the Timaeus, right? The shape explaining how these things are moved. For to be moved by themselves is the peculiarity of animated natures, as Aristotle observes in the 8th book of his Physics. Nor is the intellectual part of the soul, such as are supernatural, purely impartible, perfectly stable, and genuine forms. Right. So the intellectual part of the soul is not like the genuine intellects. It's an image of them. The science of the soul, therefore, is a medium between metaphysics and physics, just as the essence of the soul. That's a really nice quote. I really like that. Um, just as the essence of the soul is a medium between supernatural and natural forms, and has something which communicates with the former and something which inclines to the latter. Hence, since the intellect of the soul is considered by Aristotle in not only the physical parts of it, it is evident that the discussion of the soul is not simply physical. Right. So it's not simply a matter of natural philosophy, metaphysics is also involved here. Um, I know we've not been going for very long, but I think I will wrap up because I have an appointment in 10 minutes and I have to get changed and stuff. So I was just wanting to dip my toes back into this and refamiliarize ourselves with Taylor's thought here. Isn't that a real nice quote? The science of the soul is a medium between metaphysics and physics. Thomas Taylor. I think I'm going to post that on X. That's a really nice quote. All right, we'll come back here. The consideration of the soul at the bottom of page 240. Sorry, 346 next time, and hopefully that's soon. So thanks, guys, for tuning in.